Welcome to the Healthy Skin Show with Jennifer Fugo, where we're flipping everything you've been told about your chronic skin issues upside down and connecting you with alternative solutions your dermatologist never told you about.
Welcome back to episode number 199 of the Healthy Skin Show. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about hormonal triggers of acne. If you've loved the other episodes where we've talked about acne, this is going to be probably one of your top choices after you hear it today. My guest is back, Vivien Allred. She's going to be dishing on all things acne. She deals with this a lot in her practice, and she's sharing a ton of really great nutritional pearls with you today. That way you can start taking action on them now. First, I want to give a shout out to each and every one of you who has shared the show and who's left a review. And some of the reviews lately that I've seen pop up on iTunes have just been absolutely heart-touching. And it means so much to me, and it's such an honor to be able to connect you with this information. It's my life's work, and it's something I'm so passionate about, making this information more accessible to more people all around the globe. And for each and every one of you who writes a review, believe it or not, it might only seem like that 1 minute was just a minute of your time and what can it do, but it actually does mean a lot because people read those reviews and it helps them decide whether there is substance to that show that would be helpful for them. So today I wanted to share a recent review with you all that really warmed my heart. This review is from someone named, and I'm going to butcher this by the way, because it's a username, is Liked Cash. And they said, Jennifer has great information. She really digs into root causes rather than just addressing symptoms. Her podcasts are generally short and to the point, no filler. I have had so many aha moments listening to her podcast to help me address things in my life to try to get my eczema under control. Definitely worth subscribing. Thank you so much for leaving a review like that. I really appreciate it. And again, this is helpful for others who are looking for why they should subscribe. You guys are helping to provide the why. And your experience really, truly does matter. And so I just want to thank you and honor you for that energy that you put into making this show a success and sharing it with other people because it's so important, right? I get to share, you guys share, we all share, and everybody hopefully finds answers to what's actually driving their issues. So without further ado, my guest is Vivien Allred. She studied to become a naturopathic nutritional therapist after struggling with many health issues during her early adulthood. Getting no answers from conventional medicine, Vivien decided to take her own health into her hands and is now thriving. Her passion to help other women identify and address the root causes of their symptoms, including acne, hair loss, and period problems. Vivien provides a ton of health education on her social media accounts and website, and she also hosts a women's health podcast called Hormones in Harmony, where she interviews expert guests in the healthcare and nutrition industry. And as you guys might recall, I have actually been on her show. So let's dive in. Hi, Vivien. Thank you so much for being back with us on the Healthy Skin Show.
Hi, Jen. I'm good to be back.
Yes. So the reason that we're having this conversation is because we had so much to talk about the first time that we didn't even get through everything that I wanted to cover with you. So I wanted to have you back to talk more about the connection between all these different root causes and what could be driving acne issues. And we, if you guys didn't listen to Vivien's first episode, we'll put the link in the show notes. That way it's really easy to find. It would probably be a great precursor to this episode. But today I want to dig into this whole connection between hormones and acne because some of the things that you shared with me Vivien was kind enough to supply me with a nice list of things that she wanted to discuss with you guys. And I just found the number of potential hormone connections. And when we say hormones, it doesn't necessarily have to mean sex hormones. There are a lot of different types of hormones. So basically, Vivien, What is the general connection between hormones and acne? And is this, and it's not just sex hormones, correct?
Yeah, when people think hormones, they think like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and they really do influence the skin. But there are other hormones like cortisol and insulin that can also be involved. But I think in some way, acne, there's always a hormonal component, but it doesn't need to be like around the menstrual cycle, for example. If someone has acne all month long, and people usually think hormonal acne is just on the lower part of the face, that's not always the case either. So I think with any acne, there's always a hormone involved, but the most common ones that I see would be, we'll start with insulin, because that can drive things like hormonal acne in terms of PCOS. So with PCOS, if you have acne as an adult woman, then there is a big likelihood that you might have PCOS, because that is a big driver. But that's not always the case. There are other things like poor gut health that can be involved, or nutrient deficiencies. But with insulin, that can drive testosterone and other androgens to be produced from the ovaries. So we all have testosterone as women. We all have androgens like DHEA. But when you have high insulin levels, that triggers a certain layer of the ovaries called the theca cells, to produce excess androgens. But with PCOS as well, androgens don't just come from the ovaries, they can also come from the adrenals. That would be something like DHEAS. So first rule in our insulin issues, and that could be based on lab work, or that can be based off symptoms. So in terms of blood work, sometimes it's not showing too much until someone is pre-diabetic or full-blown, like has full-blown diabetes. So you can't always just look at blood work, but things to look at would be high or elevated fasting insulin, or HbA1c, or glucose levels are some common ones. For some of my clients, I have them do finger prick blood glucose testing, so postprandial testing. You can get some kits off Amazon, or there's some ones that you can put into your arm, some new devices that are a lot easier, but a little bit more expensive. Because some people, it's not first thing in the morning that their blood sugar is out of range. So if they went to the doctor's office, it would probably show normal. It's after they eat that's the problem.
And how long do you, can you just walk someone through, like, generally speaking, like, how do you do that? Like, what's the time frame that you're looking at the numbers after eating? And yeah.
How long for?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would start with 15 minutes after eating. It depends, because some people, the glucose spike, like the highest spike, only happens an hour after eating. For some people, it's within 20 minutes. So I always say start at like the 15-minute mark. When you have the implant into your arm to do the glucose test, that's a lot easier. So the continuous glucose monitor, CGMs, you can basically like scan a device or your phone over the area, and it's going to tell you. So rather than pricking your finger every 15 minutes, it's going to be way easier. But I do probably every 15 minutes for up to 2 hours. And I know that's like pretty intense. You don't need to do this every single day. I recommend doing like 2 to 3 full days of testing, and then put the kit away and just go up based off symptoms, because otherwise it gets a little bit too stressful. But that can give you really good insight as to how high your glucose is spiking, how fast your body is clearing the glucose from your body, because if it's staying elevated for a long period of time, that could be a sign of insulin resistance, and that could be something that's driving your acne. But you could also go based off symptoms.
Okay, and I wanted to just ask you quickly about diet, because we talked about this previously with Bree Weisselman. Some of you have probably heard her episode. And in that episode, Bree had specifically mentioned that she doesn't like dairy for folks who are struggling with PCOS, acne issues. Some people notice their acne will clear up entirely just from removing dairy. But you said something to me before we started talking about dairy, and I think that the listeners would really appreciate hearing this. So what's your take on dairy?
So it is a common food sensitivity and food allergy. A lot of people know that. So it can be a problem, especially when your body is out of balance. Other sensitivities can develop, but it can be lifelong as well. So with something like gluten and dairy, they can just be lifelong and you can't really change that. But for a lot of my clients, I've noticed that they develop dairy sensitivities because their microbiome is messed up, or they have low stomach acid levels, or they're just chronically inflamed. And once you address those things, you can introduce dairy back into the diet. In a lot of cases, it does depend on your ethnicity as well. I find that a lot of people from European descent tend to tolerate dairy a lot better than those nearer to the equator. So that could be a factor. But with acne, and PCOS, I always do a 30-day, 60-day elimination, just to let the body calm down any inflammation and just to see whether it is a factor or not. Because the thing is, with a food sensitivity, you don't really know that you have one until you remove that food and do a challenge. So if you've drank milk every day of your life and then you don't really have any symptoms, if you remove that, your body will obviously tell you when you introduce it back in if it's not a good thing, because you might get bloated, you might get diarrhea, your skin might flare up with a breakout. So I always do a short-term elimination, and whilst we work on the underlying root causes, reduce inflammation and then bring it back in. But for many people, dairy is fine. There can be an issue, obviously, with quality. So I always recommend organic, especially in the US, the dairy quality is pretty bad in a lot of cases. For some people, raw dairy is better as well because it has the natural probiotics and enzymes that help you tolerate it even more. One thing that may not be great is whey protein, because that is very insulinogenic. So although it's low in carbs and it's low in sugar, it really promotes insulin release in the body. And if you have PCOS or high insulin, high blood sugar levels, that's just going to be adding fuel to the fire. But something like cheese or an organic milk or butter or yogurt could actually be a good health food for some people. And some people, I've actually noticed that their skin gets better when they add some of those things in, whether it's like a kefir. Sometimes it's the fat-soluble nutrients that are in there, like the vitamin A or the iodine, the minerals in there that can actually support things like thyroid function and therefore improve the skin health. But it's always worth ruling it out as a factor first, but it's not a blanket statement. I see some people like no dairy at all if you have acne. And a lot of people with acne have food fear, where they just like keep, and I know it's the same with eczema and psoriasis, they just keep removing food after food. And I've been there as well. So I want to get to the place where my body can tolerate as many foods as possible. And that's by improving your microbiome, immunity, all of that.
Yeah. And I just think it's interesting, the point you make, especially in regards to this conversation on insulin, that because whey protein is the most common protein, I think, on the market. And so for most people, when they hear me say, well, you should probably consider adding like a protein powder to your diet in order to increase the amount of protein you're getting, the first thing that they can find on a store shelf is whey. It's the most common one. And for some people, it can be very like whey would make me sick probably in a concentration like that. But what would be if someone does say have a concern about acne and maybe they have been doing whey protein or they were told by someone to do whey and they have noticed that, oh, now that I hear this, now that I'm thinking about it, I think my acne has actually gotten worse since I started using this protein. What would be a better option? And we'll preface this with everyone is different. Yes, you can certainly have allergies to any one of these things. So this is just a general list, and then you figure out what's best for you.
Exactly. So there's the animal-based ones, like the hydrolyzed beef protein or collagen protein. And then there's the plant-based or vegan ones, which would be pea or hemp. They would be my favorite, but always check the ingredients because a lot of them add like 20 additional ingredients in there. So just make sure it's organic if possible, just good quality, minimal ingredients, minimally sweetened if possible. But yeah, with the protein thing, it's important to have that blood sugar balance. But the whey protein is why bodybuilders use it to gain that muscle mass. But in some people, it's just not a great thing.
Yeah. And so let's kind of like step to the next thing, to cortisol, because I think that cortisol is something most people are familiar with because they do have concerns that their adrenals may be taxed or overwhelmed with all the things going on. A lot of people believe that they have something called adrenal fatigue, which is not really a thing. It's more the HPA axis dysfunction that's going on. But how is cortisol involved with acne?
So both high cortisol and low cortisol can be a trigger, but I usually see high cortisol being the most problematic, because when your body's pumping out cortisol from the adrenal glands, it's also pumping out things like adrenaline and some of these androgens as well, like DHEAS. And these things can increase sebum production in the skin. They can increase inflammation. They can increase blood sugar and insulin. So despite your diet, your stress levels can increase those as well. So it's like a vicious cycle. But having low cortisol as well, or that quote adrenal fatigue, which I agree isn't really a technical term. It's just that the brain is like telling the adrenals, like, stop producing so much because they've been stressed out for too long. But cortisol is anti-inflammatory. So when you have low levels of cortisol, your body doesn't regulate inflammation properly, and that can lead to skin issues as well, not just acne, but eczema and psoriasis.
And so do you find something like the Dutch test to be helpful? And because I know that I always like to see that cortisol response grid that they have. I think it's really helpful, especially in terms of like, and this is an aside, but for people who've had a lot of steroid exposure because of steroid creams and things, I always find the whole cortisol chart to be really helpful. Is that also, so that's also helpful for acne folks as well?
Definitely. The Dutch test isn't one that I jump to right away with acne, because just based off like clinical experience and certain symptoms, I can tell usually what the driver is, whether it is progesterone, lack of progesterone, or high androgens, which we can get into. But if someone is still struggling and they're also having other symptoms like fatigue or anxiety or menstrual problems, then the Dutch test can be good. It's like a one-stop shop for all of those things. Some people might have heard about the salivary or the saliva cortisol test. I'm not a huge fan of those, because that's just looking at free cortisol levels. So how much is available at the tissue level, which is important, but the Dutch test doesn't just show you that, it shows you how much your adrenals are actually making. Because sometimes people get diagnosed with, quote, adrenal fatigue because their free cortisol is really low. But when you look at the Dutch test, the body's actually producing a ton of cortisol, and they're just looking at the wrong thing. So if they were given treatment to boost their cortisol even more, thinking that they had adrenal fatigue, they're just going to make the issue worse.
Oh, wow.
So the Dutch really shows a comprehensive look at how much your body is making, how it's getting rid of it, how it is throughout the day. So is it high at the wrong times, like at night when it should be pretty low? So yeah, it's a really good test.
Okay. And actually, let's talk about androgens, because I think that seems to be a good segue. So for people who don't know what androgens are, what are they?
So it's a class of male hormones, and men obviously have, I think men have 10 times as much testosterone as women, but women have small amounts of testosterone and androgens, which are these male hormones. Men have small amounts of estrogen or estrogen within the system. They're basically just masculinizing hormones. So they can, in excess, lead to things like excessive hair growth or hirsutism, which is also common in PCOS. So if you have acne and you're also dealing with excess hair growth on like the beard area, so I think where men would grow hair, and sometimes on the nipples, sometimes underneath the belly button, or in other parts of the body, they can have issues. That could be a sign of high androgen levels, or if your skin is excessively oily, if your hair is oily, if you're losing hair on your head and gaining it on your body in excessive levels, then the places that you don't want it, basically, then that could be a sign that your androgens are too high. But having low androgens isn't great either. So we want a nice balance.
It sounds a lot like the Goldilocks principle. Like we don't want too much, we don't want too little, we want just the right amount for you.
Sometimes that's easier said than done in some of these cases.
Yes.
But with PCOS, a big driver is that insulin, high insulin levels and insulin resistance. And
in some instances, I have a family member in her 20s who was actually given spirulactone for her acne because they told her that she had high testosterone. So how does high testosterone levels in a woman, aside from the hair growth and such, how does that actually contribute to acne?
So that increases your sebum levels mainly. And then that can obviously clog the pore. The pore gets like a localized infection, and that's where the redness and the pus comes in as well. So it mainly is just increasing that sebum production in the skin and increasing inflammation as well. But there's another androgen called DHT that testosterone can convert into, and that one is very potent. So I have some clients who have even normal to low levels of testosterone, and therefore they told that everything's fine. But the way that the body converts that testosterone, it turns it into this super potent version called dihydrotestosterone, and that's the one that is really problematic for skin issues.
So in this instance, is the medication the only option, or are there other routes to rebalance the testosterone and also not just the testosterone per se, but to maybe shift it away from that more potent acne-prone byproduct?
Yeah, it's an enzyme. It's an enzyme that does that called 5-alpha reductase. And you can slow that down using things like saw palmetto, zinc, nettle, reishi mushroom, and things that upregulate that enzyme, so speed up that DHT production, would be inflammation, that high insulin, and stress. They're the main things as well. So I'm always trying to figure out the cause of the problem, not just throwing like reishi mushroom as a supplement, because that's not really going to fix the problem. It can help, but it is a bit of a band-aid solution. So I'm trying to figure out, does this person have insulin resistance? And if so, how can we address that through increasing muscle mass, balancing the blood sugar, more protein, less refined carbohydrates, better sleep? They all help. Does this person have chronic inflammation stemming from infections in the gut or environmental toxicity? Removing those things. So it really is just about getting the person healthy and balanced overall. And a lot of the time, these hormone imbalances, they just fix themselves. Not always, but hormone imbalances don't happen randomly. They happen as a result. They're usually like the tip of the iceberg, the things that people focus on, but you need to look under the surface at all of these other things and address those first, rather than jumping to medication.
And so for someone who is on, say they're on spirulactone now or some other medication, and I know sometimes people are also put on birth control pills to try and deal with their acne as well. Do you see in your practice where people are able to eventually stop taking these medications? So it's not like a lifelong, like you're stuck on them.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. And I usually have people come to me first, which is kind of like the ideal thing, try and address the problem first. And there is a time and place for medication. So there is, if someone is really struggling with their skin, like mental health wise, the birth control pill might be a good thing just to get their skin a little bit clearer if they're struggling with depression. But if you don't address the root cause of the acne now, and you just go on the spironolactone, then you're not really addressing the problem. And sometimes the internal imbalances that are driving your acne, they just get worse. And then your body will tell you in another way that it's struggling. So it may not be acne anymore. It may be chronic fatigue or hair loss. They can spiral.
Yeah. And actually, so speaking of chronic fatigue, a lot of times people who have thyroid issues also have chronic fatigue. And the thyroid can also, I find, like if someone is dealt with long-term stressors, a lot of times their thyroid can really take a hit. So how is the thyroid also related to this whole acne piece?
This is one that's commonly overlooked. And I never heard about thyroid issues contributing to acne when I had it. And sometimes it's a direct connection because thyroid is like the metabolism of the body, and it's involved in things like skin cell turnover. So if that's happening at a slower rate, then you're going to have skin cell buildup, and that's just that's going to predispose you to developing clogged pores and then breakouts. Some people get chronically dry skin with thyroid issues, so it really does affect the skin. But it can also affect things like progesterone production. So if your thyroid is sluggish, then your body is going to have issues with producing progesterone, which is very beneficial for the skin. So progesterone helps to keep things like DHT and androgens in check. And it also helps to give us that nice glow. That's why a lot of pregnant women, they get the pregnancy glow. A lot of the times it's due to progesterone levels. So if there's one hormone that's amazing for skin and helping acne, it's progesterone.
Yes, we're not suggesting that you supplement to
Oh, no.
it, by
No,
the
we want
way.
our body to produce its own natural progesterone.
Yes.
That's the goal. So no bioidentical. Sometimes bioidenticals can actually make acne worse. So that's an important point. So the goal is to have your body do it on its own. So a healthy thyroid, it works both ways. You can't really produce progesterone until your thyroid's healthy. But then in order to have a healthy thyroid, you need healthy progesterone. So they all are interconnected.
And can I ask one other question now that you bring this up about the progesterone? Is this one potential scenario or explanation of why a woman who, say, pre-pregnancy might have awful skin, get pregnant, acne could clear up, and then post-pregnancy it comes back?
Definitely. Yeah, it's another reason that people get breakouts before their period as well. Because if you have low progesterone levels leading up to your period, you're going to be naturally estrogen dominant. So the goal is to be more estrogen dominant in the first half of the cycle leading up to ovulation, but then we should be progesterone dominant between ovulation and before our period. So if someone's breakouts are cyclical and they notice a direct correlation between where they are in the menstrual cycle and how many breakouts they have, then it's usually low progesterone levels to blame.
Interesting. That is so complicated. This is why acne is not my wheelhouse. Like sometimes it's one of the complaints that someone has, but usually they're like, no, I have psoriasis, right? I'm like, okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of things, a lot of crossover with diet and nutrition with all of these skin conditions, but acne is like more specific in certain areas.
Yeah.
Like with the whey protein, it can be used for eczema with increasing glutathione levels. And that's why it's usually recommended for liver support because of the high sulfur. But with acne, it can be a problem. So there's a few things like that they don't cross over.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, it's so interesting. I have one last question for you because I think this would benefit everybody listening. You actually mentioned stress a number of times on this podcast because stress does play a role in our hormone balance in general. Do you have one favorite tip that you like to share with clients of how to start I hate the term de-stressing or managing your stress. It sounds like nobody wants to manage their stress, but do you have one suggestion for people listening where they could maybe initiate this one little thing tomorrow and do that one little thing every day? And at least it's a start. And then once they sort of learn to ride that bike, they could begin adding on to that. But I think I'd be curious to hear what a stress relieving tip you have to help those with skin issues.
Because sometimes people, they get more stress when you tell them to stress less. They're like, oh my God, I shouldn't be stressing. My skin's going to be, my gut. Yep. So the goal is to relax more. We'll use that term. And one of the best ways to do that is through the breath. I know people have probably heard this before, so I'll give you the breath one. So the breath is one of the best ways to put the body into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest and heal state of the nervous system. So if your life was actually in danger, and the body doesn't know the difference between real or perceived danger, you could be sat on your couch, on your sofa, worrying about 2020 COVID or all of these other things, and still have that same physiological response as if you were being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. So your mind and your brain is very, very powerful. But when I say stress as well, it also includes things like infections in the body, deficiencies, thyroid issues, low progesterone levels. They're also stressors on the body. So obviously some of those things and environmental toxins and air pollution, we can't control those types of stress, but we can control how much we delegate tasks and who we surround ourselves with. So breath, when you breathe through the nose in particular, it really calms the body. And if you were really in the same room as a saber-toothed tiger, you would not be able to breathe that deep and slow. So it tricks the brain a little bit. So you can do it. It's free. It's easy. Particularly before meals, is really powerful to get you into that rest and digest mode so that you can actually break down your food properly. But there's a few different breathing techniques. There's the alternate nostril breathing. There's box breathing. So you can Google or YouTube a few of these. But another tip, I'll give you an extra one,
Thank you.
is the mindset shift around stress, because I was that person who knew that stress was a trigger for my PCOS and my acne, but someone telling me that was actually making it worse. So there's a really good book called The Upside of Stress. I think it's by Dr. Kelly something. I'm sure you can find it. It's called The Upside of Stress.
We'll find it. We'll link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, those are very useful, but that talks all about how to reframe your thoughts and your perceptions of stress to make it less harmful to your body. So in the morning, if you have a big to-do list, you change that to I get to do these things instead. Or if there's a project or an interview at work that you have, instead of thinking how scared and nervous you are for it, think of that feeling inside as excitement instead, because they really do feel similar. That racing heart, the sweaty palms, that tension. You can easily trick your brain into thinking that you're excited rather than thinking that you're scared, and that's going to have way less detriment to your health, way less cortisol being released with that same scenario.
Yeah, I love that. We'll definitely put all of those, everything you shared in the show notes. And also, too, just to remind you guys, I did actually do an episode on 3 different breathing exercises. I'll link to that in the show notes as well. That way you guys can easily find that. And if you want, I have YouTube videos that just walk you through how to do those. So they might be helpful. So Vivien, I want to thank you so much for sharing all of this. This has been a great conversation and really enlightening. And I love too that you took this in so many different directions to show that, you know, someone may not have all of these different things going on. You might just have 1 or 2 pieces of this hormone imbalance, but why it's so important to take a step back and not just say, oh, it must be my sex hormones. It must just be my progesterone. Or my insulin, because there could be other pieces to this that complicate one's particular acne picture, especially when they're really frustrated and it's a chronic, stubborn problem they can't get rid of. So I just want to thank you so much for sharing so much great information, and I look forward to the feedback that we'll get and the questions, and then hopefully we can have you come back sometime.
Amazing. Yeah, I would love that. I feel like I love acne so much because of how complex it is. For like a detective trying to figure it out. And for someone, it could be as simple as removing dairy, and that could be like the cure for the acne. Whereas someone else like me, there was like a ton of different things driving it, and it really needs to be a holistic approach.
Very, very much. I agree with you. Yes. I love this. That's why I'm so glad that we met. And remember, everyone, I was actually on the Hormones in Harmony podcast. It's Vivien's podcast. So if you're looking for more information on this, check out her show and share that with people who are really struggling with this, because I have a feeling they're going to learn a lot. And then if you want to get in touch with Vivien, you can find her at vivanaturalhealth.co.uk. I will link to all of her social media in the show notes. And gosh, Vivien, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Jen.
It was a real honor to have Vivien back on the show, and I do so hope that the information that she shared today was quite eye-opening. I know for me it was. If you would love to check out the resources that we discussed, you can head on over to skinterrupt.com/199. And if you have any questions or comments, you can leave them there. That way we can keep the conversation going. And as I was saying earlier, reviews mean a ton. So whatever podcast platform you are listening on, please make a point to rate and review the show, and then share this episode with everyone you know who's really struggling with acne. This could be a total game changer for them and help them recognize other patterns and supportive things that they need to do in order to rebuild healthy and clear skin. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.